What's going on, guys? I'm Retro Bliss, and you are on the Retro Bliss Rewind podcast. Welcome to the show. We're going to have a fun time tonight. We're going to talk about video game ports. And so, without further delay, first of all, if you're watching from Mike's Gaming Gala, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you. He is simulcasting over on his channel right now also. So, without further delay, let's bring Mike in. And
Hello.
Let's bring in our special guest tonight. It is Casey, the Intellvision Gamer.
What's going on, guys?
I have to say this, though. Brian from BD Retro Mods was supposed to be on the show, and he is not well. He is not well. So we wish Brian a speedy recovery. Hope you get better soon, bro. We don't like it when you're down and when you're not feeling well. We want you to take care of yourself. That's the most important thing, though. So, wow, this is going to be a hot topic tonight, guys.
It can be.
I think it's gonna. It's just my prediction. But what we're going to do is I'm going to bring it over to Mike for just a bit and let him just kind of give you an overview of video game ports, and then we'll just start the discussion from there. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I mean, video games ports have been around for forever, basically since the start of video games. And obviously the biggest one to kind of really show the value of having that name brand, here's a port, would be Space Invaders. Space Invaders is an arcade from 1978 that was released on the Atari in 1980, if I'm not mistaken. And
you're right.
It exploded. It is considered to be the first system seller. It is considered to be, one of the best-selling games, even of all time. It is the second best-selling game on the Atari 2600, and obviously Atari learned that lesson. And since then, they ported and ported and ported. Whatever the popular arcade was at the time, it would get a port, whether it be from from Atari or from other publishers, famously Donkey Kong. But one of the best ever ports ever from an arcade.
Don't make me kick you. Don't make me kick you.
Pac-Man for the Atari 2600.
Oh, he's out of here. No, I'm kidding. You guys know I could kick him off.
The best-selling game. Well, the fun thing is that I can bring myself back now.
Yeah, that's true.
The best-selling game for the Atari 2600, and obviously a massive disappointment. You can say a lot of things about Pac-Man 2600. I don't think it's a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, but it is absolutely a bad port. And I think maybe the most disappointing port of all time, considering what was expected.
Agreed.
And then obviously, if we're continuing with the ports from arcade games, that became less as time went on. And certainly right now, it's not really the thing that it used to be. But it did persist all the way through the 90s. And, you 90s kids out there will remember Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat. Those were must-have games, getting them on the Genesis or the Super Nintendo. Even later, you had the Cruisin' World, Cruisin' USA, those kind of racing games. And then the Dreamcast, some of the best sellers on there would be Crazy Taxi and games like that. But as time has moved on, arcade ports haven't been a big thing. But the other type of ports, of course, are games that are released on one system and then also released onto another system and ported over. So you'd have, for instance, the M Network games from Mattel on the Atari 2600. Atari Soft would publish on the Intellivision and on the ColecoVision. And that too has gone through history. So that's kind of where ports come from. And the reason people do ports is because if somebody has something really popular, you want it on your system. And then, of course, today we've got guys like Champ Games, Spiceware, Daryl Ginter, we've got Bob DiCrescenzo, amongst many others, people making new ports for these old systems that are, some of them are blowing us away. So that kind of opens the conversation, I guess.
Okay. I can tell you one thing. I lived during the time when, right before Space Invaders came out. I had my 2600. I had some games for it. They were okay. They were all right. But when I heard Space Invaders was coming out, I really saved my money. And I was younger then than I was when Pac-Man was released. So I guess my expectations weren't quite as high, but it's still...
Well, and that's the thing. Space Invaders proved that people will accept concessions as long as the look and feel is still there.
Absolutely.
You don't have the 11 rows and the 11 columns and the 5 rows of invaders. You don't have the 4 bunkers. You have 3 bunkers. You have a 6x6 grid of invaders. There are definitely concessions made, but it is an excellent port. The sound effects are great. The gameplay is solid. It has that look and feel.
Right. And like you said, once that came out, it exploded, and it put Atari on the map. And it wasn't long after that everybody wanted to port, including Atari. Atari was doing everything they could to start porting things to a fault. Like you said, with Pac-Man 2600, it was so bad. They just were rushing and just trying to get it out so they could get that money grab. And that's what it was for some people. I was doing some research prior to the podcast, and Atari themselves, during the life of the console, not including porting from other consoles, but just arcade ports, they had over 30 ports. But then third-party ports, there were over 30. So there were over 60 ports for the 2600 during its life. That's a lot of ports.
And most of the best-selling games on the console that came from Atari were ports. I think there's Yar's Revenge and maybe 1 or 2 others of the games that sold more than 1 million copies. Like only 2 or 3 of them from Atari aren't ports.
I mean, that name recognition, that's kind of like whenever you tie in a movie to a game, and that name recognition, if you see a game you've seen in the arcade versus some new game that's similar, I mean, which one are you going to buy?
Well, and if it's your favorite game in the arcade, of course you want to be able to play it.
You got to have it at home.
Right? And Chris Walker is with you, Phil. He says that I'm presuming this is Pac-Man, is only a bad port if you have the sound turned up. It's an awful port without sound. And Mr. Baseman wants to know why you have Zookeeper ranked so low.
Well, yeah, those are ports after the life of the console, but yeah, those are just my champ game ports, and Zookeeper, I think it's growing on me, but it's not my favorite champ games game, but it is really good. It is really good.
I love it. I don't know, Phil, if you watched my review, but I found out a little hack how to like spam that score and get a massive score.
I think it was from jumping it over more in the bonus stage. I saw that. Yeah. Excellent. So, maybe I'll try to figure that out next time.
I'm just going to mention to the chat and anybody watching that the Intellvision Gamer upgraded his OS today, so he's been having some choppy issues. So he might be in and out.
It might be fixed.
Fingers crossed.
It did some kind of automatic update and then automatically relaunched my browser, and I haven't you guys free since.
Yeah, Defender Warlords is probably my favorite paddle game of all time.
Oh yes.
Great. It's a port, and if you look at and at what it was on the Atari 2600, it's really basic, but I loved it. And then I would highly recommend. This is still on Atari Age, but this is
Medieval Mayhem,
the ultimate Warlords port. As far as
good luck getting it.
It's on Atari Age still.
I know, but I'm still waiting on games from.
If you order it, I guarantee you will get it within 5 years.
He's guaranteeing.
I thought you were going to say 5 days.
And
I heard his
Jeremiah
move
Thomas
is
is taking
all-
another shot at me for Night Driver. But Night Driver was a port.
It
Night
was.
Driver was a port.
It came out the same year as Space Invaders. Somehow I don't think it did quite as well. It came out in 1980 also. So
and Copper Mutant is referring to the Champ games because they use the ARM chip. They do not work on the Plus ecosystem, unfortunately.
Since we're on the topic of ports after the system, I don't want to get away from what we were talking about, but I do want to mention that the reason why I think the Champ Games does so well and why people are so interested in getting ports from him, in my case, those games that I didn't get when I was a kid and that I really wanted, the technology wasn't there, the programming technology, the chip technology and whatnot. They're out now. And so it makes me wonder, as a 59-year-old Gen Xer, saying, what if this came out during the life when I was a kid, and I would have never left the house ever, right? And that's why people, I think, get
that's
them
why
now,
my kids never do.
But in our case, in my
these. Is that Phil frozen?
I thought it was me again.
Oh.
That's a good shot to be frozen.
Ever. And then I get it, and I'm like, you guys. Okay, I'm back.
Dear. Yeah, okay, now you're back.
I don't know what happened. All I saw were spinning circles on the StreamYard.
Yeah, you were gone there for a little bit, buddy.
Yeah.
I thought it was me.
But like I was saying, I got the 2600 Pac-Man, and I'm like, I'll never leave the house ever. And then when I got it, I'm like, you guys want to go play some kickball or something? Because it's like it was just that bad. But
yeah, I mean, if you're expecting the arcade version, I get all that. But like for me, I played a lot of it. I didn't play the arcade yet. I played Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 first, so there was no disappointment on my end. But I can definitely.
That was also my first experience with Pac-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I had to play coin-op games for a long time prior to getting getting into the console gaming. So it's like, well, this is coming to the system. I know it's not going to be great, but at least hopefully it'll be close. And some were, and some weren't. There were some really good ports for the 2600 specifically during its life. And then there were a lot of turds also.
I would argue even worse than Pac-Man would be Tutankhamun on the 2600.
Oh, it was bad, but I never
you
had,
can only
had
shoot
that, so.
You can only shoot sideways, so let's change the levels to scroll vertically. What?
Yeah, didn't make a lick of sense.
Michael Doherty is saying we're all too young if we played Pac-Man on the 2600 first. Well, there is an entire generation of people who played Pac-Man on the 2600 first. I was playing it in probably 1984. That would be my introduction to video games. Sorry for being youthful.
Yeah, well, that I think video game taste and nostalgia and all that plays a part as to like how old you were and what your experiences were with them as a kid. I know that Ballistic Coffee Boy, we've talked about this on the program. He got it. I think it was a pack-in game or whatever.
He was first. It was first for him,
and that's all. He was very young when he started playing it, and he just loved it. Right. Well, me, I had been playing regular Pac-Man in the arcade for a while, and I'm like, this is not anywhere close to what I was expecting. So, and that's one example, but there were some good ones that Atari did specifically after Space Invaders. They released Asteroids. They released Missile Command. They were good.
Centipede.
Centipede. Well, Centipede came out. When did Centipede come out?
That Centipede came out the 83. I think it came out the same year as Pac-Man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same with Donkey Kong.
So actually, yeah, but Defender, it was okay, but I didn't like all the flicker even then, back then, but it was at least something. Berserk was off the chain, man, for playing
Berserk
at home, right? And so Atari knew that they had magic in a bottle, because what they did with Space Invaders, they thought they could replicate with a lot of these others. And with Asteroids, they had a lot of sales. With Missile Command, they had a lot of sales.
Well, that's what I was saying. Most of their biggest hits were ports.
Right. So, but it started becoming a problem when they decided to value quantity over quality. Why don't we, it never came to their mind, why don't we make sure that this is a decent port and then we'll release it? No, Christmas is coming up. It's got to be done in 6 weeks. Get to it. Right.
And remember when we had our interview with the Activision guys, Gary Kitchen, Dan Kitchen, and David Crane, they specifically said, it's like, you have no idea how Christmas centric the video game industry was. And if you did not get your game out for November or October or whatever, the Christmas buying season, if you released it in January, that was the difference between 500,000 sales and 1,000. It was that drastic. So you can understand, unless you're going to delay the game a year, there is that target. As soon as you've got the license, you are programming that game for the Christmas season.
Dan, I don't know if he's on saying, why don't you put that up? He has a question I think is interesting. He's saying, who has the guts? I'm going to put that gently.
Yeah, put it up.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Dan.
Yeah, okay. To reproduce 7,800 cartridges, yeah. So you can send $20 to me. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. But seriously, it would be nice if they would do that. Like I said,
I would love Atari. I'm not going to yell that, but I would love Atari to, especially the hard to get stuff. Absolutely re-release those. I don't know why they it's not a port, but I don't know why they re-released Outlaw. That you pay $20, you can get that complete in box, but re-release these, like Ninja Golf was a good one. Ones that are difficult to get. Yeah. I would love to see that more.
Yeah. Some of which are ports, but so Casey, I want to hear a little bit from you now. You dabble in a lot of things, but you're better known for your Intellvision knowledge and collection. And I would like to know your take as to why Intellvision was one of those companies that didn't port nearly as to the level that Atari did.
In my opinion, they focused so hard on all the sports titles. I think Atari had a lot of the ports, already. I don't know these things like for a fact. It's just my opinion. I didn't really notice as a kid, though. We had a lot of different games. I think I had like 35. We would play the sports games at my house, and we would go play all the space, ports at all the kids that had Ataris. And we didn't really think anything of it for my age group. But I mean, I was 5 when Intellvision came out. So you weren't really thinking ports, and, you just had the game and played it. You didn't care how good or bad it was for the most part. If it was the game you wanted to play and it worked somewhat the same, you got to play it at home. And I don't remember any of us ever talking about that until we were much older.
Yeah, that said, as Michael Doherty, licenses. Intellvision had the Tron licenses. They had Solar Sailor, they had Mesotron, they had Tron Deadly Discs. Burger Time, which was it's the best version of Burger Time as far as I'm concerned. I love that.
I like it even over the arcade.
I'm not sure I'd go that far, but it's right up there. It's an excellent port. Now, it didn't come from Intellivision, but Dig Dug's on the Intellivision. Atari Soft did port some stuff to the Intellivision, so there were ports, but
Spaceport for the big one for the time.
Yeah, exactly. And they just, it hurts to say as an Intellivision fan, but I'm an Atari fan as well, so credit where credit is due. Intellivision was not as big and successful as Atari was in their video game division. Mattel, very successful. But in their video gaming division, they just didn't have the same kind of pull to get, we want that on our system.
So I think Intellivision had way less than 15 total. Yeah. So, and I had read and saw somewhere else what Casey had said about them focusing on the sports titles. They even advertise that on their commercials a lot, which George Plimpton. But on the other hand, what about ColecoVision?
Just interrupt very briefly. Yes, Derek, you did. We did talk about it.
I had to take a break to take some medication after that, though.
So ColecoVision was
about everything.
Big leap. It was a big leap forward. It was a big leap forward graphically, certainly compared to what else was there. And their biggest pull was obviously Donkey Kong. They came out swinging strong with Donkey Kong. They got the Nintendo license for that one. They did have, in fact, most of their games are licensed ports of some sort. But which actually makes it very difficult. Like if somebody was to buy the ColecoVision IP, what really comes with it?
Right,
you don't have any of the games, right?
That's a good point. I know that just in my research, I counted almost 40, and considering the library that ColecoVision had, now they were, like you had mentioned prior to the show, ColecoVision had more success, so they were around a little bit longer, but their game library still wasn't huge. So to have, close to 40 ports in that library was a good chunk. But it wasn't exactly like going to the arcade, but it was so close in so many of those games, and some of them they were just as good, I thought. So yeah, I mean, I unfortunately I missed that boat. I was already out of the house, married, whatnot by that time, right? So I had other fish to fry. I had to feed my family and whatnot. So didn't even think about getting another gaming system till the Master System. So I was after the 2600. I gave that away with all my games, unfortunately, because I had a bunch of them with complete in box with all the boxes and everything. But yeah, I mean, but they were so good. And even now, when I stream on the channel, if I do a ColecoVision game, 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to be a port because they're that good. And people, it's something that they recognize, right? So even if they are not familiar necessarily with ColecoVision itself, they might be familiar with the port.
Here's a fun what if. Prime Rib asks, what if Coleco got the Pac-Man license and Atari got Donkey Kong? Coleco ported Donkey Kong to the 2600, and it's not terrible, but it sucks. Is Pac-Man on the ColecoVision? It's on the Intellivision.
Let's see. It is not on my list.
Yeah, so
it's not on my. At least not back then.
It would have been, you're especially with the format of the screen. Unless you're panning, you're never going to have the same maze. But I can almost guarantee you, ColecoVision would have made a black background and blue, walls and the correct color ghosts. So
yeah. So
yeah,
you guys,
so later, the Donkey Kong games were re-released under the Atari brand. I actually made that mistake on one of my mini reviews with I think Donkey Kong Jr. So Atari did eventually get the Donkey Kong license, but they just used it to re-release those Donkey Kong games.
so I don't. So, what was your first system, Mike? And if so, what are your favorite ports for that system?
Atari 2600. My favorite ports would be Space Invaders. Space Invaders is like a first love for me. Berserk, I played a lot of. Moon Patrol, that is a port of an arcade, correct? Yes. Yep. Yeah. I'm trying to think what else. I played a lot of Pac-Man. It is not my favorite, but I did play a lot of Pac-Man. I love Breakout. What other, man? Just there are a lot. There are a lot.
I actually cheated. So
Centipede. I played a lot of Centipede too.
Yeah. Berserk. You mentioned that. Did you have that as a kid?
Yeah. Of course, that was the second game I mentioned.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Berserk.
I didn't hear you.
Was one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Casey? What was your system? And what were your favorite?
Sorry, I'm answering Jeremiah.
What were your favorite ports for that system?
Intellivision was my first console. I was 5, but I mean, honestly, I played just as much Atari 2600 because all back then, this was around 1980. We all hung out together. If we were at my house, we were playing Intellivision. If we were over at someone else's house, we played Atari. So, I mean, I had access to all those ports, plus, all the few that I had on Intellivision. Burger Time was probably the only one that comes to mind that I can even think of off the top of my head that I had on Intellivision. I had about 35 games when I was a kid.
Quite a few for an Intellivision collection. Yeah.
Oh, Frogger, yeah, Frogger. You know what? I didn't play a ton of that as a kid, though.
Yeah.
So, I guess I should go to this route. For me, Space Invaders was basically my first notable port. I had Skydiver and I had Canyon Bomber, which were released prior, but they, I didn't really experience those much in the arcade at all, if at all. And to this day, I love both those games, but it was Space Invaders that really, really sucked me in. And then it wasn't long after that Asteroids came out, and you guys, I know that the Asteroids have a solid color to them, but if you play on the right game setting, it is very, very near arcade. If you play with the aggressive asteroids and the UFOs, and
I liked Asteroids as a kid.
Yeah, it was great. Let's see what else. I had Berserk. Berserk was amazing. I wish it had voice, but I mean, just having it at all was a big thing. Like, oh, I'm so excited. And then, let's see what else. Missile Command. I played that today on the channel.
See, as you guys are mentioning this, I remember I played so much Missile Command. I love Missile Command. Yeah,
Missile Command. There were a number of these ports that you've mentioned, though, that I didn't have. I didn't have Warlords. I didn't have
Warlords.
Moon Patrol or Joust or Galaxian.
I know what you did have, though.
Or Dig Dug.
Pac-Man. Oh, I love Dig Dug too. Dig Dug's awesome.
Yeah.
There's great ports. There's great ports.
Right. So, but for me, those were like I have much nostalgia for those specific games that I mentioned because of the fact that I was so excited to be able to play these games at home. And it was just something that I was not used to as a 12-year-old kid when I first got my 2600 at 12. So I was older even before the port started coming out. So by the time the port started coming out, I was an early teenager. So yeah. But Let me ask you guys another question. Let's get to some why are people exactly porting now?
Why are people porting?
Hold on, leave that up there. Leave that up there.
For like Intellvision, I think it's, we're constantly putting out new homebrews, and I mean, what's going to sell better? Something with name recognition and a port that we've never had, or some new title? I mean, I prefer new titles, but I don't mind a good port either, especially if it's an obscure one that I haven't even heard of.
So it is 100% name recognition. It's, oh, I've never heard of this, but I've heard of this and I know I like this, so I'm going to buy this. The problem with me is I love ports. Obviously, I love ports. I am surrounded here. Here's some Atari ones. Here's Intellvision. Here's a couple more Intellvision. These are all ports right here. I'm surrounded by ports. I love ports. And actually, hey, sneak peek, this week's review is Vectrex ports. I love ports, and it's all about name recognition. And I have the ColecoVision Time Pilot right over there. I'm recording footage for that this week. That said, if you're making a port, what makes a good port? What makes a good homebrew port? There's a couple things that make a good homebrew port. First of all, you got to choose the right source material. If you pick a crappy game and port it, it's still going to, no matter how good a job you do, it's still going to be a crappy game. I wouldn't go so far as to say that's a crappy game, but this isn't the source material here isn't good. It's okay, but is it worth porting that game? Maybe not.
Is it even worth more to buy it at the price point today?
Well, and exactly. So, and there is something to be said for ROM sales. I might pay $5 for this, but would I, if I was at the last chance sales hitting again, would I buy this one? Probably not. I'd probably buy a different one. And Mr. Baseman, I am sorry. I didn't say it's a bad game. It's just, it's an okay game. It's not great. Anyhow. So if you got to pick good source material, number one. Number two, and I say this about the Intellvision homebrew community a lot. If you're porting a game from the Atari 2600 to the Intellvision, you have to do something with it. You can't just take the same Atari graphics and put them on a superior system and be like, hey, this game that you can buy for $10 over there, I'm now going to charge you $60 simply because I put it on this console. That's not good value for money.
Add bosses, do something to enhance it.
Exactly. Add something to it.
Better music.
Make the graphics better. Make better music. Make new levels, new bosses, like you said, new game modes. Much like what Champ Games was with his challenge modes, right? And then the other thing I will say, and there's a couple of these on Intellvision, and if we're talking specifically about ports, which we know they're unlicensed, it's piracy, right? We're all pirates, okay. But if you're porting from something from a superior system down, and it looks and it works great, that's super impressive. Dragon Quest on the Intellvision, it is a direct port. There is nothing added, but it looks and sounds like the NES, which is incredible. Yes, absolutely. It is that's like, if you're going to take from something superior and bring it down, that's fine. Otherwise, you got to add something to it. You got to make me be like, wow, there's something new. There's something worth buying. Medieval Mayhem over Warlords. And there absolutely is. Anybody who's played this one knows that it's got different game modes, awesome graphics. And I am so sorry, Jeremiah, that yes, like all of these are last chance sale games. It is just, honestly, it's at the point where it's despicable that all the people from the last chance sale haven't gotten their stuff yet.
Something's amiss. Something's amiss.
I think it's coming soon. I've heard he's fully moved and settled in, and I believe things will start flowing again.
I got to address something real quick. Going back to Mr. Poe style. Okay. This was
I'm just looking at the comments.
This was my first handheld gaming system.
What is that?
It's a it's a ColecoVision electronic quarterback. It's got
you had
LED.
To have the green one.
Yeah, well, they're all green, but so for me to have anything on a video screen was like, oh my! I mean, this was just like red dots moving across a screen. That's all it was. So having a video game system and having anything was great, but when the ports started coming out, then it was really, really exciting until the big letdown. But
TuneCon?
Well, and that's another thing I wanted to bring up. I just remembered there was such a money grab by all of these companies, not just the third-party companies that contributed to it, but Atari themselves. There was such a money grab for these ports that they started cranking out them in such a fashion that they were a lot of them were starting to get bad. It wasn't just Pac-Man 2600 that was bad.
If there's one thing that I'm learning as I go through and do all my mini reviews, and I know for anybody who watches my mini reviews, work has been so busy lately. I haven't done them in the last week and a half, so I will be getting back to those when things quiet down a bit. But one thing I've noticed is that it's not that these games are bad. It's not that there was a glut of bad games. It's just that there is a glut of very samey games. You've got a lot of games that kind of look and feel the same. They don't play great. They're not bad, but it's just, okay, we're over it.
Well, I see. Now, for me, it was a matter of expectation. When you get a new game, Casey was saying how much he likes new homebrews, something that's not been done before,
Mm-hmm.
and that's great. And Atari was doing that for a while, and they still did up until the time they stopped doing it altogether. But it got to the point that if you did get a port, you have a certain level of expectations because you're probably getting that because you've heard of it or you've played it in the arcades. And so because of the amount of games that were at such a bad quality level that it dismayed my confidence in the games that I was going to get, even the originals. And I think that helped contribute a lot to the video game crash of 1983. It was starting already prior, but I think it just came to a head in 83. It was already in the works, but people were buying it. But after Pac-Man and some of these others, it's just so I mean that's just my take on that. I know that most of us, including myself, knew that the 2600 had limitations and that it would never be like the arcade version. But like you said, if it was playable, it had the same playing feel and mechanics, and it didn't have to have the same number of sprites or the ratios didn't have to be exactly right or whatever. But if you had the same type gaming experience with it, it was acceptable. And I knew that going in. But man, it just really that's why I ended up I gave mine away. I didn't want anything to do with it anymore. That was just me. And like I said, I was older. So
well, yeah, you gave it. Everybody knows that when you get married, you have to get rid of your video game stuff. That's why.
No. I did that prior. I had bought an Atari 800 XL and just started teaching myself to program, and I had a few cartridge games for the most part, but I just the gaming aspect of it was like, I just gave it away because I'm like, what's the point? It's, I don't need this piece of garbage because that's all that's coming out now is garbage, right? So again, one of my biggest regrets in life was that I did that, but I did give it to a family in need at the time, so there were some kids that didn't have anything, so they didn't know any better.
But it was a heavy sixer.
It was a heavy sixer too. It was a telegames, but it was a heavy six.
Yeah,
telegame.
Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah.
No, so Radio King, yes, you buy more games when you get married, but that's after several years of marriage when she goes to bed like 3 hours before you do.
Not when it's new.
Not when it's new.
I was working 60 hours a week for years, and it up to the point where what started becoming popular at that time was PC gaming, and that's where I gravitated toward for many years after that. So
been there as well.
Now, one thing we should probably talk about, and I was saving this because this is kind of a closer to the end conversation bit. But Jeremiah Thomas did mention there was an announcement, and Atari is, I don't know if you guys remember Breakout Beyond being advertised. Now, I think it is on Steam, but it was supposed to, my first time seeing it was when it was advertised for the Amico. And Atari is bringing Breakout Beyond to the masses.
VCS even, right?
I believe so. I believe it is getting on the VCS. So that's really interesting, and that is a port. It is not a faithful port, but it is a port.
The problem with Atari has been in recent years is that they have ported so many different of their titles that people are like, you know what, you're selling us the same old junk in a different package. I want something new. You know, how many times are you going to keep porting?
Dipping in the same well.
Yeah. You know.
And that's how I've felt about homebrew communities sometimes. It's not that I don't like ports, it's that they keep dipping into the same well. But Breakout Beyond looks awesome. And if it has a paddle controller, a way to play it with a paddle, I am all about Breakout Beyond. And Michael Doherty, no, I played a lot with my wife on my honeymoon, but didn't buy any games.
Now, if there's a rare auction, I might have been on eBay, but not buying at the moment.
Oh man. So, what about current ports? You were talking about like with Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat and things like that back in the days of the Super Nintendo or whatever. But there are games that are being. Would you consider them being ported? Like if it was an Xbox exclusive and then they sell the rights to PlayStation and they put it on theirs? Is that the same thing?
Yeah. So I mean, there is a loose definition of ports where, let's say. You've created a game for Sony, but it's going to be a multi-platform thing. But you create it first for one of these systems, or Steam, or Xbox, or Switch, and then you would go through the process of porting it to the other systems. I don't really consider those ports in the same way. It is porting. You're making something that was built for one system work on another, but it was always intended to be that. So my definition of ports, at least in terms of this conversation, is more along the lines of a game is created for one platform, and then later somebody either buys the rights to it or pirates and makes it for another system or hardware.
Just curious how you guys felt about that. Man, I'm struggling to find. I thought we would be talking about this and talking about this and talking about this.
Well, people have opinions about a lot of them.
One thing for me too, you know, I'm not versed in every console, so there's times I'm like, oh man, this new Intellivision game is great, and someone will say, well, you know, that's a port, that's a game from the, you know, such and such console. I'm like, I never even knew that existed. So I know that happens to other people as well. So there's that, as you know, obscure ports I like more than when it ends up being a good game. If it's an obscure port that not many people actually know about, I like those more than just a straight port. I mean, I like a good port, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But I prefer something that's equally good and new.
When it comes to homebrew games, I like new experiences. Like recent, you look at the upcoming Police to Avenue Redux. That is a port, technically. When I first tried it, it was a port, like just here's the original, and then here's the port. They've done a lot to it. Yeah, then they added all the graphics and music and map and all that. I had no idea it was a port because I didn't have an MSX or whatever it's ported from. I think it's MSX. Space Bandits. That's a port of a TI-99, Texas Instruments game.
I learned that on your video.
I didn't know that when I first played it. So ports like that, Derek, I am not putting that comment up. Phil will be mad at me.
Derek,
however,
PG, bro, PG.
That game does have a port on the Intellivision. And if you really want to see it, Casey, in his paddle testing video, played it for me.
It was requested.
It was requested.
And it worked well.
Yes, it does. That type of game is perfect for a paddle. That said, where was I going here? Yeah, so I love ports of obscure games because they are completely new experiences to most of the people that are going to get them. Whereas Chant Games, I have played all of the things that he's ported in their original versions. What's really impressive... What's the matter with you, Derek? You're taking my job. What's impressive about those is how good they can be and how good they look on the 2600. And of course, even after that, he adds more stuff, like with the challenge modes or the advanced modes. So I fall into those two categories. If you're going to make a port, you have to either impress me with it, or I have to have not played that game before and never even heard of it before.
So I want to get back to the 2600 just for a second. It dawned on me, and I was thinking about third-party developers. Parker Brothers almost exclusively did ports for the 2600. The games that they released for the 2600 were almost exclusively all ports. They just were. So they weren't afraid to get out there and get the licensing for a game for the system. They thought that it would pay dividends down the road. So they went ahead and did that, some probably to beat Atari to the punch in some respects. But yeah, they had a ton. If I look at my collection, I see my Parker Brothers games, it's like, yeah, that's a port, that's a port, that's a port, that's a port. But
that's also part of that lesson that was learned with Space Invaders. And it's a lesson that, even to today, especially in the homebrew community, people are still using. You've got name recognition. If you can find something that's popular and just make that again on a more accessible system, you've got an instant market right there.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize that, but yeah. Now we had Dan Kitchen on about 2 months ago. I guess it's been by now, maybe longer than that. We were talking about Donkey Kong and a question that he had brought up because there were a lot of people who were wondering about the Donkey Kong port for the 2600 as to, well, were you told by Coleco when you ported this game for Coleco that it had to be bad? And
oh yes,
I don't believe
he
that
said,
was a thing.
First of all, it's not bad. It's just
not good.
It's not great, but it's not bad. I played it a bunch, but it was a limitation of the hardware that he was allowed to use, which was the 2K.
And it was a limitation of the time. Remember how he said it's like he said, if I had made that, an 8K game instead of a 4K or whatever difference it was, like a 16, like bigger. It's like I wouldn't have had the time to do it. Which I imagine is a similar issue that was with Pac-Man. It could have, cramming it onto a 4K cartridge was probably also a time constraint.
And early on, I mean, that memory was super expensive.
It was.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, at least in its initial release, Donkey Kong on the Atari 2600 was a Coleco released game. If they intentionally made it crappy, they're sabotaging their own profits. And ColecoVision was, I mean, more than happy to take advantage of Atari's popularity. They had the Gemini, they had the Game Module 1, they had the, you want to play Atari games on our system? By all means. So and of course, Gary shot down the whole idea that he was asked to make it crappy. It was just crappy because of the circumstances in which it was made. And I would argue that it's not crappy; it's just not great.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's not crappy. It's just not great. But, trying to think. So did ColecoVision write all of the ports for their system? I mean, it seemed like most of the ones that I've seen are on their label.
You mean, did they program them themselves?
Yeah.
Well, I think Gary Kitchen is proof that they didn't.
Oh, for the ColecoVision? I mean, for their
system.
For their system.
I imagine they had in-house programs. I'm not an expert on
now there were a few like
corporate structure was.
The Atari Soft. There were a number of Atari Soft ones that they did for ColecoVision, but there were a lot of the ones that I've seen are on ColecoVision carts, but I don't know. I can't say. But I know that they're so good though. I would have died to have the ColecoVision back then with all those games. Oh my word! I wouldn't have went to college.
There are still
it's probably good you didn't have it then.
Yeah. So,
sorry, what were you saying, Casey?
There are still limitations on the ColecoVision, and there's still some things like today on the homebrews that they can't do that other consoles can, like Intellvision. Every console has, good things and bad things, and the flicker, that's a big one for me. Like, I'd rather play any game that has minimal flicker over a game just because it's cool that has a lot of flicker. I'm not a flicker fan.
Like, it's like the Intellivision is much more powerful than the Atari 2600, but when Yar's Revenge was being ported over to the Intellivision, one of the most difficult things to replicate was that static when you blow, like in the center of the screen, and when you blow up the Cotil, or however you pronounce that.
Cotile, yeah.
Cotile. Just because that was something that was super easy to do on the 2600. It was just kind of a byproduct of the hardware.
It was actually an accident. They came across it by accident, they said.
And on the Intellivision, you actually have to like program static, which is insane.
Yeah. So are you guys good with buying ports these days? I mean, Opcode Games, man, they're starting to get quite a collection of ports for the ColecoVision that are really, now a lot of them require the Super Game module in order to play, because they will not play on original hardware.
I would do so much more ColecoVision stuff if I had a Phoenix, because it'd be easy. But yeah, here's Time Pilot, requires
the
Super Game module.
So sweet. That game is amazing. Oh man.
I'm looking forward to playing it. I haven't had a chance yet, again, because it's a pain to set up my ColecoVision. Man, I would love to do more, but I need a Phoenix.
It's great with
ColecoVision is the only console that I have more homebrews by far than original games.
And one of the things about the ColecoVision homebrew community, at least more in the past, especially with Collector Vision, they're all just ports. and
They're all
their
what?
console ports, and
Oh
their
yeah,
console ports.
CollectorVision and Opcode Games. Whenever they do those clubs or release anything, I've been a member every single year. Which reminds me, I haven't signed up this year yet. I need to do that before I forget.
So, like with CollectorVision, my experience was when I joined last year, which was my first time joining, it gives you access to the ROM vault, and there are tons of ports in the ROM vault. But I've noticed that the ones that were never released in physical format, they're not great for the ColecoVision. They're okay, but they really don't take advantage of the graphics of the ColecoVision. I don't think. That's just my personal opinion on that. I mean, it's nice to have them, and I play them from time to time, but they're not my favorite ports now. Like Time Pilot, I got some more games coming from Opcode that I'm really anxious to try out the Super Game module on to see what it can do. But if you do that, don't forget to play with Brian's awesome controller for the ColecoVision. It's
BD Retro,
which is another reason that I've started to get more into ColecoVision, because I hate that original controller. So I got Brian's controller, his arcade joystick, and it's awesome.
Yep, it is. It's the bomb. It's the way to play now. So, well, guys, I think we have talked quite a bit about video game ports today. I've learned a little bit, and I've from you guys, and I've learned a little bit from the chat. And
I have a question for you, Phil. Have you made your peace at long last with Pac-Man 2600?
No, until I get my refund from Atari and Todd Fry, it's on like Donkey Kong.
He owes you nothing.
So we know
yes,
your
he does.
Port. What is your favorite port, Phil?
That if we're talking about the ones that were originally released during the life of the console, I would have to. It would have to be on the 2600 that I would pick it from. And my favorite one, I don't know if it's my absolute favorite, but the one I played today, Missile Command. It was so good. I loved it. It was so good. But then again, Asteroids, that's one of my favorite 2600 ports that was originally released during the life of the console. Now, if I'm going into the current stage for the 2600, it would be Elevator Agent. That would be a good one.
Yeah,
that'd be my number one.
It is still unbelievable to me that is on the 2600.
Yeah, I think
if I was to pick my favorite original port, and not that I played it when I was a kid, but in hindsight, Missile Command for the 5200. It is made for that stick. That stick is terrible on almost any other game, but Missile Command on the 5200 is one of the best ports ever made in the 80s, my personal opinion. It looks and feels right. It's just you have to get over the console that it's on. But that would probably be my favorite original. If I'm saying favorite modern, I'd say probably most impressive modern I would agree, Elevator Agent. But my favorite, it could be Bosconian. It could be Medieval Mayhem. I love Medieval Mayhem. It could be Ladybug Arcade. I've always loved Ladybug. It's my favorite ColecoVision game. Yeah, tough to say.
Yeah. How about you, Casey? What's your favorite port and why?
Original one. I mean, I only remember two, and I'm sure I had a few more. But Burger Time, I still love playing that today. I mean, yeah, I mostly play the homebrew, but man, I always loved Burger Time, and I didn't even know it was a port back then.
Yeah,
well, I mean, that's the other thing too. If you were too young to go to arcade, like you weren't going to arcades, or too young or too poor, or just not have them around you, you didn't even know.
No.
Well, but the sprites are a ton larger than the arcade version. But if you really look at it and play it for a while, it's the same gameplay. It's just a little bit of a different map, and you just got to learn, a few little nuances of the game. But yeah, that was a great port. So
I was frozen up a second ago whenever you was talking about Elevator Agent, and you said, I don't know how that's on the 2600. And I just wanted to add that, when I play Champ games, I think that almost every time. How did they do this on the 2600?
It's come to the point with my reviews for Champ games that I start off, like, even before talking about the game, it's like, it's Champ games, so we know it's great, but how great is it? Let's see.
The downside to
on a higher level.
Yeah. The downside to modern ports now are all the people that are getting back into retro gaming by way of their 2600 and 7800 pluses, because a lot of those games that John writes for Champ Games, a lot of them don't work. There's just 2 or 3 that do. And even if you emulate and want to get the ROM, the ROMs are getting so large now, like with Turbo Arcade. If you don't configure Stella just right, it won't play. It just won't play. I had to get with John to figure out, hey, how come this isn't playing? And he said, you got to do A, B, and C, and then it'll work. And then I was able to get it going. But it's like, so physical on original
just
hardware
is some original hardware.
Yeah, that's really kind of the way to do those things. So anyway, all right, guys, listen, I appreciate you guys being here. Very interesting topic. Brian, get better, man. We needed you tonight, man.
So much to say. I know it.
Absolutely.
It's weird to not have him on.
Yeah, but
you're all alone down there.
Yeah.
Bottom row.
It wasn't as weird as that week Phil was gone.
There's been a couple weeks that Phil's been gone.
Well, I've always made a cameo in every.
He always makes a cameo, sometimes in a wife beater.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Mike, for that. So anyway, all right, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out on Retro Bliss Rewind, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Night, everyone.